Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar. Today we're going to highlight the new U.S. inbound changes, and we'll provide a brief software tutorial of the BorderConnect's new U.S. inbound manager. Major changes to the inbound process took effect on July 29th. Are you prepared to meet the electronic messaging? Have you updated your internal procedures? And how are you managing this new process? Also, we'll find out how BorderConnect's U.S. inbound manager can help you with this new process. We'll learn how to arrive and export U.S. inbound shipments easily, as well as other helpful tips such as how to send a port diversion and more. To utilize the chat feature on the right-hand side of the page, some of you may need to click the button Create Channel in order to unlock it. So simply click the button and then navigate back to the video. And if there are any questions within the chat box, we will answer them at the conclusion of the webinar. So let's get started. Here's Debbie Dent to kick things off.
Good afternoon, everybody. So let's talk first about what is a bonded load. We find sometimes carriers that have been a bonded carrier for quite some time forget some of the responsibilities or what they actually signed up for when they became a bonded carrier. So we're going to go over a few just conceptual ideas as to what is a bonded load. So when a shipment arrives at a U.S. port of entry, but the clearance of that merchandise will not occur at that U.S. port of entry, it is considered often in bond and in the control of the bonding party until reaching its final destination. In-bond shipments is a term applied to the status of merchandise admitted provisionally or with conditions to the U.S. without payment of duties and/or taxes or entry summary accounting. An in-bond shipment indicates an origin where the bond is arrived and a destination where that same bond will be arrived at its authorized destination or location where that bond would stop. Bonded transport also means the bondholder is responsible for the goods until the export from the U.S. is completed or the accounting of that merchandise occurs. A bonded carrier needs to understand responsibility to move bonded freight is more than just providing a CBP Form 301 to parties that in the past completed filings on an approved bonded carrier's behalf or delivery to a location named on the bill of lading. So let's talk now about what is a bonded highway carrier. A bonded carrier has posted security to cover the following: movement of goods to a U.S. Customs office inland not located at the border and/or where release of that shipment or export from the U.S. at that destination will occur. This merchandise is known as bonded merchandise or cargo. This is also considered goods in transit through the United States. This may be goods moving within the U.S. from a bonded warehouse or a foreign trade zone or a port where release or clearance will take place. A bonded carrier has posted that security with U.S. CBP and has a valid U.S. bond. I referenced earlier that CBP Form 301. This Form 301 will include information related to the bonding party and responsible person to meet bonding cargo handling mandatory requirements. This CBP Form 301 will reference the surety posted by an established surety company and include reference to the CBP identifying number, commonly for the U.S. a tax ID, and if a Canadian carrier, for example, has a U.S. bond, they will have an importer number associated to their account. A bonded carrier, because of the liability associated to the bonded merchandise, should manage the use of their bond carefully and only provide bonded merchandise services with established procedures and processes now built into your internal operations. The new changes in BorderConnect's U.S. Inbound Manager tool now provides visibility to monitor and ensure that the requirements related to bonded merchandise are met. Remember, as a bonded carrier now, Customs has made you liable, and your liability has increased significantly. We have seen a number of carriers that have received penalty related to these new changes. So in bond change, as Justin mentioned, there is changes. On November 27th, 2017, U.S. CBP published a final rule entitled Changes to the In-Bond Process. A phased-in process remains in place with soft enforcement related to the named changes in that final rule. But effective July 29th, all in-bond loads carried by a bonded carrier will be required to report arrival, exports, and diversions electronically. The soft enforcement period did end. CBP will no longer accept that 7512 to perform arrival and export functions. Air shipments will continue to be exempt from these requirements. You may actually have a port accept the paper document, maybe provide a stamp that can be affixed to the form, but the customs themselves are not going in any longer and actually doing what was done inside the computer. Effective July 29th, in-bond arrival and reported will be required to be filed electronically within 2 business days of the arrival at the destination and/or the export. And carriers now will have a standard 30-day maximum transit time for all modes of transportation. Carriers will be required to electronically request and receive permission from CBP before diverting in-bond merchandise from its intended destination port to another port. And CBP has clarified that the party whose bond is obligated is the party that is responsible for ensuring the in-bond record is up to date. The conditions related to the movement of bonded freight is not changing. Carrier's responsibility, though, has changed. So on the screen, you see a Form 301. This is called the actual bond document that is issued after the surety company has filed and the carrier has posted and is now, this is issued by CBP after you've become a bonded carrier. It will include your SCAT code. It's tied to your SCAT code. It's tied to your tax ID number. And the U.S. bond, customs bond number is what will be provided or included in the filing. This document should not be provided when not willing to be responsible for the movement of that bonded merchandise. Keep this document secured in management files. It should not be with dispatch. It should not be just listed out on the website for other forms that you may post on your website. After that bond and you're a bonded carrier, the form that is now specific to the merchandise is called a 7512. The paper document is not going away. The form itself has not gone away. It's the functionality related to the form. So carriers may have the ability now to create a 7512 as part of their handling of the bonded merchandise. In order for a carrier to have that ability, they need to create the 7512 by first being assigned their own series of ACE in bond numbers. So if you're a bonded carrier out there and you're moving that merchandise, you can actually apply at a port of entry. There is a process that's included where you can get your own series of ACE in bond numbers, which would be considered the entry number now on that 7512. Carriers may still provide their info to customs brokers, freight forwarders, or other parties that are able to file and create that bond entry, often still referred to the QP in bond process. Carriers are obligated to the movement of bonded merchandise if their bond is associated to the bonded merchandise and must have a risk management control in place. Carriers and parties involved in the handling of that merchandise need to understand the new rules and the risk associated to handling now bonded merchandise. And carriers should not say yes without new procedures in place. So let's talk about carriers' ACE in bond. A carrier can receive, as I mentioned already, the issue of their own ACE in bond numbers in order to create that 7512 or bonded entry directly, or they can continue to use the services of a third party to produce that 7512 document on their behalf. Their client or the customer may also use their service provider to do that. There's a number of ways that an ACE in bond or a shipment bonded merchandise can be filed. A carrier's customer may have their own process in place to create and file the bonded entry, and that carrier, though, would be required to sign a power of attorney authorizing that third party to use their bond in order to move that bonded merchandise. And that should be done with caution. Often custom brokers provide a blanket style power of attorney. That power of attorney should be limited to one-time use only. Carriers crossing the border will indicate one of two types of bond merchandise, ACE in bond or QP in bond, when completing the electronic e-manifest. In either case, once arriving at the port of entry into the U.S., the bond is authorized for movement from the arriving port and will need to arrive at the final destination port. The information filed electronically must match what is actually occurring physically. Otherwise, electronic diversion or amending of information is required to be completed to ensure accurate information is in place. When you're creating an ACE in bond type 7512, some need to know information. Do you know what type of in bond movement you are carrying? There are three types of bonded merchandise movements. 62 is transportation and export. So you're not only going to be transporting that merchandise, you know that that merchandise is also due to be exported out of the U.S., and you should not complete a type 62 unless you're also related to the export that's going to incur. A type 61 is for immediate transport. So you're just transporting the merchandise from one port to another port. And a 63 would be done an immediate export, which is almost used as a turnaround or to return and close a bond that may have been filed. You will need your own series of ACE in bond entry numbers if you're going to associate that to an ACE e-manifest. You also, and the broker often will make the determination as to what type of bond. And if, as a carrier, you're requesting them to do a T&E bond or a transport-export bond, type 62, they will follow through with that, even if that's not the type of bond that's probably in your best interest. So do you know both the in-bond destination, where the arrival of the bonded merchandise is filed with CBP, and where the next port of arrival is going to be? And that driver needs to know that same information. So if freight is leaving Laredo, Texas, for example, destined with a export to Canada, and that driver is going to route through Port Huron, Michigan, but then physically arrives at Detroit, Michigan, that's where a diversion of port needs to occur. So what is on paper and what has been filed electronically with U.S. Customs needs to be the same. Is that product subject to FDA? Because even bonded merchandise is still subject to all the same FDA requirements as if it was staying permanently in the United States. And paperwork provided by the shipper should still be on hand and will provide additional cargo information that will be needed, including clear and accurate description of the cargo that is moving in bond, part numbers, descriptions, etc., the value of the merchandise, and the HS code. So setting ACE in bond entry type in BorderConnect and selecting the type of bonded entry, Justin will explain that during that little demo that will be done. So now creating your e-manifest with an ACE in bond shipment type. So we're going to assume now that you're a carrier crossing the border with a bonded merchandise. So you're maybe leaving Canada, you're going to go to the port of entry, but that merchandise is going to move on probably for export to another country. We see that often happen between Canada and Mexico, the U.S. being used just as that transportation to get the merchandise to the southern border in order for it to be customs cleared into Mexico. So you would create your e-manifest trip for entry into the U.S. There would still be a trip number with a U.S. port of arrival, now considered where that merchandise is being authorized for movement. You would still include truck, trailer, and driver information. You would save and start the ACE in bond on the drop-down box, enter the in bond number, and that becomes now the 7512 entry number. And again, during Justin's demonstration, he can show you where we would enter, or you could enter your ACE in bond series that you received by U.S. Customs, that you can enter that right into the system. Additional fields will be suggested and be required to be completed in order to create that 7512, so having that shipper's paperwork is mandatory. Creating the e-manifest where it's a QP bond. So now you're not actually creating the 7512 as part of it, but someone has already created and filed that bonded entry. Then it becomes the type of shipment would be a QP entry. So you would create your entry the same as we talked about earlier. You would have a trip number, you would have a truck, a trailer, a driver, and then your shipment type would be QP in bond. And it would ask you questions that are going to be different than if you were creating the 7512 document yourself. The 7512 information is already on file and is going to link through that manifest. And again, Justin's going to show some of that as we do the demonstration. So now let's talk about how do you arrive your bonded shipment. So today, you need to have a risk management process in place where you know that you have bonded merchandise that is moving. Your dispatchers or operation personnel should know that there are extra requirements related to that bonded merchandise that needs to be addressed. So effective July 29th, drivers will not report to the CBP office like what was done in the past. They don't stop at the port or go inside the port for the officer to do it. You're responsible to do that electronic closure, to do that electronic arrival. Carriers, if using a third-party software such as BorderConnect, will complete a letter of intent, file it with CBP, and receive a filer code. That will allow you then to do that arrival using a third party. You can use the ACE portal, you can use other service providers that may be able to do that as well. But once you are approved and you've received that filer code, this is when you would be able to use the ABI or the US Inbond Manager tool that you'll see demonstrated to you today. Everyone that is using our new tool should always start the process with the Find New In Bond. That will allow you to send a status query to see what is on file with Customs and confirm that the information that is on file actually matches what you expect to be in place. In-bond result screen, after that answer is received back from USCBP, you will see a provided listing, and again, the management of this process and the tool that Justin's going to demonstrate to you will tell you what type of bond you've got, what the status of the bond, is it completely closed, is it in some form of processing, the bill of lading number that is associated, and then the last action that took place. And then you can go in and view and get more detail related to that bond. To view the bond entry details, selecting the view, and it will then show you, so in our example here, the entry number or the bond number of this particular transaction was 586878552. The bond was filed originating in Port Huron, Michigan, so the goods had come from Canada. The first point of arrival into the U.S. was Port Huron, Michigan, and those goods are destined to go to Laredo, Texas. When those goods arrive in Laredo, Texas, that's where you as a carrier have the ability to go in and arrive the merchandise, and you must do that 2 business days after the arrival has occurred. And you're going to provide information including the date and the time the arrival took place, and where did those goods arrive to. Every port of entry has a filer code or a firm's code that you will use to close these bonds. WP send request search, and really what I'm doing here is just sort of going across the management tool that you'll see demonstrated. It provides a number of options that you can also complete to assist you in controlling these bonds. So you have what we call an inbound dashboard. You can send status queries. You can arrive. You can search arrivals. You can see what's still open. You can see if you have any late bill of ladings that might have, again, systematically come up as a late messaging. You can see what container port or diversion transfer liabilities have occurred. So you need to sort of be on the know now. You're fully responsible for this as the carrier. The onus is on you. Your company will be the one that receives penalty action. So having the ability to check warnings, check open bonds, confirm that your bonds are actually closed is definitely a positive for the industry. I should also mention that bonded shipments that does not include your direct handling of the export. So you're not actually going to cross the border, for example, into Mexico. You're going to leave those goods at that freight forwarder or a location in Laredo, Texas, where they'll be cross-docked, gotten ready for Mexican customs clearance, probably hauled across the border for a carrier that we call a drayage company, and transferred to a Mexican carrier for delivery. Those should always be done as a Type 61 bond when going from Canada to Mexico or to the southern border. But in reverse, if you're coming from Laredo, from Mexico, and coming to Canada, then it should be a Type 62, a T&E type bond, because in fact you are involved in the export. You're going to make that delivery directly to Canada. So we're going to turn this over now to Justin. He's going to do the demo, and if there's any questions following that demonstration related to maybe changes of the rules or the customs requirements, or just general questions that you might have, then I'll stick around and be available to answer those. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Okay, just bear with me here. I'm just going to try and switch screens over so you can get a better idea of what I'm working on. Okay, so here we are. This is the newest feature, newest addition to BorderConnect, the U.S. Inbound Manager, specifically designed to help carriers stay compliant with the new electronic messaging of bonds. And we also added some neat features as well, and I'm going to try and briefly show them to you. So as Debbie mentioned before, the first thing you're going to want to do, I'm going to try and go through step by step, and we'll assume that you have a new in-bond and you just want to find out the current status of the bond. It could have been created in BorderConnect, it could have been created in another software provider, or it could have been done directly by the broker with a QP entry. In either case, you can send status queries for these bonds, regardless of if they're created in BorderConnect or not. However, there are some unique features, such as the auto-closing feature when it comes to northbound shipments, where you can actually have a complete hands-off approach just by linking it to an ACI trip. So when the bond does arrive at the North Port, it's automatically arrived and then closed. So the first thing you're going to want to do is, now bear with me here, this is a demo account, so some of the auto refresh features and some of the data won't be as filled in as it regularly would be if it was an actual bond. So I'll try and do my best here to give you an example of how to find a new bond first off. So in the top left-hand corner, you'll see Find New in Bond. That's basically going to bring you to a page where you can send a status query for the bond. So let's say you know the in-bond entry number and you just want to find out, hey, what's going on with it? Just type in the in-bond entry number. Now up here you would see a Send in-bond status request. As I said, this is a demo account, so we don't have the full capabilities, but the user interface is unchanged, and this is essentially what you would see. So after you did send the bond, you'd be automatically brought back to the in-bond manager, where you would see the responses for the requests. Now here you can see this is the search in-bond status query page. This is essentially where you'd be brought back to. And then once you get a response in about 30 to 60 seconds, you'd click into it, and you would be brought to the in-bond report details page. Now, the amazing thing about this page is that you have all the bond details at your disposal, and you can take a look at the details such as the type of bond, the carrier SCAC. Now, in some cases, especially if it's coming from a freight forwarder at the southern port of the U.S., you'd sometimes notice that it's a completely different SCAT code. It's not necessarily your SCAT code, but you're just going to be taking control of that bond from the freight forwarder and potentially bringing it to a northern destination, or the opposite way. You can also see the name of the company. You can see any bill of lading details associated to the bond, such as the where it's being imported to or the originating port. You can see all of this, which is very handy, especially if there's a discrepancy. Now, the person or the company that filed the bond may have incorrect information, and if that was the case, you could easily determine if there was an issue with this bond just by looking at the in-bond report details. Very handy, and you can also go to the report itself. And from this, you can see the in-bond report details, and you can see timestamps from CBP where you can. Now, in most cases, this is, like I said, a demo account. You could see the step-by-step procedures and basically follow the whole timeline of the bond itself, especially if the bond was close to being arrived or closed. From here, after you do have the in-bond details, and let's say, for example, you just realize that the bond did arrive and you want to send an arrival message. Well, you can go up to Update In-Bond, and you have the options here to arrive the in-bond, export the in-bond, send in-bond port diversion request, or send a transfer of liability. Now, the neat thing about this is that once you go to arrive in-bond, it's actually very straightforward. The in-bond entry number is already filed there. You have the in-bond destination, and all you'd have to do here is type in the firm's code, so essentially the warehouse to where it's going. Now, what I usually do and what I usually tell our customers, if it is, let's say you don't know the firm's code, you could easily type in the address, for example. So it makes it very easy and convenient. Or let's say you know the name of the actual firm's code itself, you could type that in. Very easy. Then you just type in the, well, you know what? What I'm going to do is I'll just put one in for now, just so you get an example of all the fields that are needed. And let's say the bond arrived yesterday at 1 p.m. After that, you just send the in-bond arrival message to CBP, and in about 30 to 60 seconds, you'd be brought back to the in-bond dashboard. So let's go back there now. And it would show up right here. After the arrival, the status would change. This one is en route. This one would be what you would see. Arrived IT bond. So then to close it, go back to the in-bond report details. Under Update In-Bond, export entire in-bond. Essentially, it's a similar page to what you'd see on the arrival, except just less fields to fill in, such as the export date, export time, the in-bond entry number, and up at the top you would see send in-bond export message to CBP. You could also arrive by bill of lading or container. Now, I'm not going to touch upon those features right now because I'm just trying to show the basics of what's going on here, but it's very simple. Now, if you say, for example, there's a scenario where you had a shipment and it was en route, didn't arrive, but yet you want to change the destination port to where it's going. To do that, you'd have to first confirm that you're looking at a bond that is still en route. So let's go to an en route one. So the 783. So the destination port right now is set to Pembina, but let's say you wanted to change it to Detroit. What you do is go in the top left-hand corner under Update In-Bond, send port diversion request. Now you have to make sure that the bond has not arrived, because otherwise this is that wouldn't be the proper procedure. You'd simply type in the new port, select it, diversion date and time, and then you'd have to enter the liable bonded carrier ID. So you'll have to make sure you know that in order to properly transmit a port diversion. And then up at the top, you'd see Send Port Diversion Request to CBP. In about 30 to 60 seconds, you would then notice that the port has been changed on the inbound report details page, which unfortunately from here, you can't see. But it would show here, and it would also show in the history that the port diversion has been changed. Another neat feature I'm a big fan of actually is, let's say you have a bond that's going northbound into Canada, and you want to automatically set it to arrive and close once it arrives at the bonded destination. You can do that by setting the auto close for an inbound. And you would have to have an ACI manifest that was created in BorderConnect in order for this to properly work. So if you do use BorderConnect for ACI, you can use the auto close feature. You'd simply type in the trip number, select it, and put in the CBP port of exit firms code, which in this case would most likely be the CBP port of Pembina. And then up at the top, you would see, you would have a button to link the actual trip. And you can also go to the ACI manifest and verify that as well. I believe I have covered most of them. And yeah, that's basically the basics of it anyway. I would recommend going to our YouTube channel and looking at our most recent videos where it goes a lot more in depth as to what the US Inbound Manager does and the full capabilities there. Debbie did touch upon creating ACE inbounds in BorderConnect. That's something that I won't be doing here. I was just going to be showing the Inbound Manager itself. But what I'd recommend doing is, it's a very simple procedure. If you're not using the BorderConnect US Inbound Manager, feel free to give us a call and we'd give you a rundown of how it works, give you a more in-depth process. And you just give us a call at 1-800-596-5176, and we would show you how to get started with that with a letter of intent and all that good stuff. But I would also mention that you can use it free for 2019. So you can do as many status queries, you can track as many bonds as you can, as you want to really, for the entire rest of the year, and you won't get billed for that. Also, take a look at borderconnect.com/inbound manager, and it'll bring you to the product page of our inbound manager, and you'd get more in-depth details on our pricing, how it works, and yeah, we'll take it from there. But we'll see if we have any questions and put it back to Debbie. And thank you very much, and I hope you got a basic understanding of how it works. And again, I apologize for using the demo account. It's just there's private accounts that I really don't want to delve into to show you details of other companies. But thank you, and here's Debbie.
Okay. Justin has shown the basics as to the arrival, how you can also do an export. He has explained when a change is needed as a port diversion. And I wanted to just clarify for those that might not understand the transfer of liability. So, for example, because now the carrier that has been originally liable because it's your bond posted against that merchandise, if you transfer that merchandise to another carrier for them to actually complete the rest of the trip, you can actually transfer the liability over to them so that you're not liable to destination. But again, if you're using partner carriers, it would be in your best interest to monitor their activity, ensure that they advise you when delivery has occurred, and then you could go in again and help manage that process directly. But you do have the ability to transfer the liability, which also would mean that they would be responsible for that arrival and the export. So I think we're going to transfer it over to see if we have any questions that may have come up. If there are none, we're going to conclude the webinar for today, and we thank you as usual for your time. And afterwards, if anyone has any questions, you're always welcome to call the number, the 1-800-596-5176, and either speak to one of our sales service people, or if it's something specific to a question related to customs, you're definitely able to select option 3 and talk to our consulting team. If you should not be a bonded carrier and have sat through this presentation and are interested in becoming a bonded carrier, we can also help provide those services or assist you with some direction on how to do that. If you are a bonded carrier, please remember these changes did come into effect. If the port should happen to continue that the officer did close your bond, please don't think of that as being the new norm. That's an exception, and you are responsible for all electronic closures now directly, or penalty action may be received. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you for attending. This concludes our webinar. I'd like to thank everyone for attending. And again, if you have any further questions, feel free to call us at 1-800-596-5176. Our support staff is here 24 hours. However, if you want to reach our consulting division and you had some more in-depth questions about specifically U.S. bonds and how to become a U.S. bonded carrier, you'll want to speak to someone in our consulting division, and that is, as Debbie said, option 3. Or you can just straight up sign up to BorderConnect and visit www.borderconnect.com. Every account starts with a free 30-day trial, aside from our consulting services, of course. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, where we post customs news, advertise new BorderConnect features, and promote upcoming webinars. Again, thank you very much, and have a great afternoon, everyone.